Mike Dean is one of the most legendary producers of all time. He's been working on iconic songs with people like Kanye West, Travis Scott, The Weeknd, and so many more for decades. And there's one key thing we all know and love from Mike Dean: his insane synth sound. So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into all the genius production techniques that Mike Dean uses across his most legendary songs. And we're going to make our own beat with 3 Mike Dean synth outro sections. And the synths continue to get better and crazier as the video goes on, so make sure to stay tuned. We've got a ton to unpack, and there's so many gems in this video that you can apply to your own production. So sit back and get ready to go into the cinematic world of Mike Dean's insane production. Like I said earlier, Mike Dean is best known for his legendary work with artists like The Weeknd, Travis Scott, and Kanye West, along with a ton of other huge names. And to me, although he's known for his great mixing and mastering, my favorite part of his production are those legendary synth outros. The reason that these synth outros sound so good is 1, because Mike Dean is amazing at playing the keys, but 2, he has a huge collection of legendary analog synths that instantly give that Mike Dean synth sound. And it's almost impossible to create that realistic analog synth sound using just VSTs. So I could show you how to do it using my real analog synths that I have in my studio, but I want to show you how you can achieve that sound with VSTs. As long as you have some good presets to start with, you can process them and tweak them to make them sound way more analog. And I'm going to show you a bunch of great VST presets to get that Mike Dean kind of sound in this video, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, everyone knows Mike Dean for his synth outros, but on one of my favorite recent songs by him, he does a synth intro with 3 core elements: a soft synth pad and a soft bass that leave a ton of room for this heavenly lead synth run.
I've seen the devil.
I love the sound of this intro, and I think it kicks off the song in a way more interesting way than just starting it with the simple loop that plays for the majority of that song. So that's exactly how we're going to start out our beat. And the first thing we need is a synth bass. If you watch this clip of Mike Dean making a track in his studio, you can see that he starts with the bass first. This is because the bass notes set the whole vibe and direction of where the music is actually going to go and what kind of emotions it's going to give off. So I wanted to make a bass pattern that was ascending or going up in pitch, leading up to the main root note of the scale, so that it felt like the intro was rising and building up to the main beat drop. So I grabbed this Cali bass preset from the Melody Mastery Analog Lab Bank and put down this pattern. Then, just like in the popular intro, I wanted to add a softer synth pad to just kind of follow that bass line and play chords on top of that. So I grabbed this Parties pad from the same preset bank and put down these chords. So that's sounding nice, but it's still super empty. So to add that cherry on top and kind of fill it out, we need that main ear-grabbing sound, that crazy synth run. And real quick, I'm gonna play it for you and show you how crazy it sounds, and then I'm gonna break it down how you can make it super, super easily. So when you first look at this MIDI, it might look super intimidating and like, how the hell do you make something like that? But it's actually super, super easy. So the first thing I did was go into this Analog Lab Bank from Melody Mastery, and I grabbed this Plucky Thing lead sound. There's a ton of super, super great leads for this Mike Dean kind of sound in here. And once I had that, I made sure that the loop that I was making was in the key of D sharp minor. The reason being, in that scale, all of the black notes are in key and they're playing the pentatonic scale. Whenever stuff is playing in the pentatonic scale, it sounds super good together. Since all the black notes are in the scale, you can kind of cheat your way into making it sound crazy by just sliding your hands like this across the keyboard. But the key is that you want to resolve on a root note or some kind of note that's working with the chords. And that's already sounding good, but if you ask me, it doesn't sound quite analog yet. Which brings me to one of the key parts of achieving that Mike Dean analog sound without actually owning any real synths: processing. VSTs often have a super clean digital sound. Everything is perfectly in time, perfectly in pitch. The reason that Mike Dean's synths sound so amazing is because they're imperfect. Since they're actual analog synths, they kind of bend in and out of pitch. Sometimes the recordings can be a little dirty and saturated. And on top of that, he owns some of the most legendary synths that money can buy. And if you're just using dry VST sounds, it's kind of hard to compete with the level of texture and sound that a real analog synth can generate. So let me show you the sauce. So real quick for reference, if we listen to all these synths with no effects, right? It still sounds good, but to make it sound analog, we got to do a couple things. First, we need to dirty it up. So we need to saturate it a little bit, because oftentimes when you're recording real analog synths, they can kind of distort a little bit, but in a good musical way. So one of my favorite groups of plugins to do this are the Moog or Foger pedals. And what I like to do is grab this chorus plugin right here, and I don't necessarily only use it for the chorus effect, which does make it sound more analog, but I like to use this drive knob right here, right? So when it's down here, you can hear how it normally sounds, right? And then as I turn it up, you're gonna hear how it gets crunchier. It sounds more like a real synth. So I just add a nice subtle amount of that to all of the synth sounds. And then another essential part to get that analog Mike Dean kind of sound is using a plugin like H-Delay, which is an analog delay. And the reason why this plugin is so amazing is because of this modulation thing right here. So essentially, this modulation is detuning the delay. Take a listen to before and after. Right, like that. So you hear how the delay is like a little out of key. Then I grabbed another one of the Moog or Foger guitar pedals, and I turned up the drive and the output even more to get more of that crunchy kind of sound. Some EQs to clean everything up. And then I did the same thing for the synth chords and the synth bass, using that chorus plugin to add some analog width and turning up that drive knob. And if we listen to those synths before and after the effects, it is a huge game changer. Right? Super VST sounding. Then we turn on the effects. And then that little thing that you heard at the end, I did a little bit of delay automation. So I automated the delay speed, which gives it that weird out of key broken delay kind of sound right here. Listen right here. Sounding pretty crazy. And while effects are super important to getting that analog sound, the most important part is having great sounds to start with. And if you're lacking those high quality, super analog sounding presets, I've got something special for you. I just released Melody Mastery, which is a huge bundle of over 18 gigabytes of sound built to level up your melodies. Every preset you just heard is from the Analog Lab Bank inside of there. And I've also made countless melodic phrases, one-shots, and ear candy using the real analog synths that I have inside of my studio that you can drag and drop into your projects to instantly get that analog Mike Dean kind of sound. And for a very limited time, the kit is on a huge sale. For the first 200 people, you can get 40% off, and that comes with all 2,300 sounds inside of here, a full 30 video course where I go over how to level up your melodies, and 2 bonus kits that you'll only get if you're one of the first 200 people. These copies are probably going to sell out super quick, so check the first link in the description down below for that. Anyways, back into the video. Now that we have that crazy synth intro, we need a more basic main part for the beat that an artist like Travis Scott could actually rap on. And since Mike Dean is known mostly for his post-production with mixing, engineering, and adding these crazy synth sections, I'm gonna go through this part of the beat kind of quickly. Anyways, one of the best sound combos that you can hear going along with a Mike Dean synth outro, especially on Travis Scott songs, are guitar melodies, just like the ones on Highest in the Room and What to Do. So to start the main loop for the beat, I grabbed my acoustic nylon guitar, which has a great classic guitar tone, and I played a very simple 2-chord progression. Next up, I wanted to add a synth that Mike Dean abuses, the Moog Matriarch.
I always love these Matriarch and Grandmother combo. It's like on my live setup, I'm always using this, you know.
The Matriarch sounds amazing for synth leads and crazy synth arps, and you can hear Mike Dean using arps all over his work. A few examples I could think of are Hell of a Life by Kanye and Type Shit by Future and Metro. Luckily, I've got tons of phrase recordings that I made using my Moog Matriarch, so I went into the Melody Mastery kit and grabbed this synth arp phrase that I made, and then I sped it up 2 times as fast as it normally plays so that it has more energy, and I got this. Next up, I just added a simple percussion loop just for some bounce and texture. And finally, to finish it off, one of my favorite analog synths is the Prophet 10, and I made a ton of one-shots for that melody mastery pack using my Prophet 10. So I grabbed this weird, trippy sounding one and just followed the guitar chords. One tip I have for using one-shots is to play them in lower octaves, even if you want them playing in a higher octave in the actual melody. So essentially, make your MIDI pattern in the lower octaves, bounce it to audio, and then pitch it up to where you want it to be, because when one-shots are playing in the high notes, they often sound kind of cheap and tinny, but when they're playing in lower notes, they just sound a little bit more rich and expensive. Anyways, after that, the main melody for this was done. So next up, I just added some super basic trap drums just to finish out the main section of the beat. So now that we have the main section of the beat done, I wanted to take some inspiration from Mike Dean's work on Type Shit and Thank God. On both of these songs, he adds a synth bridge section that kind of breaks up the flow of the song. It makes it feel like it's evolving, like it's not just the same 8-bar loop playing over and over for the whole song.
She gripping all of my balls, I gotta move, type shit. All the homies crushing on some full type. Flying to the devil, I'm fine. He always trying.
So essentially, the song starts out with the more typical kind of beat, goes into that synth bridge section, and then it drops back into a more simple, usable beat. So I wanted to add a synth bridge here, and to start it out, I wanted to work on the transition. And one great technique that Mike Dean uses to make the transitions and switch-ups more cohesive is actually starting the transition before the B section starts. Take a listen to how Mike Dean does this with his guitar solo on Hold My Liquor. By doing this, it makes it feel a lot more cohesive and like it's a flowing piece of music rather than just a bunch of 8-bar loops stitched together. So the first thing that I wanted to add to kind of rise up and build into that switch up section was a siren-like gliding synth sound, which you can hear Mike Dean using all the time, but one of my favorite examples is on Highest in the Room. The reason that this synth sounds so good is because of a technique that Mike Dean uses all the time: tension and release. The note sliding like that makes it go out of key and makes the listener feel kind of uneasy and anxious a little bit. And then when it finally resolves to that root note of the progression, it releases all that tension and it's super satisfying to the ear. So to do the same thing, I grabbed this ARP Me lead from Analog Lab, and then I just played one note, the root note of the key that we're in. But I started with my finger all the way down on the pitch wheel so that when the note starts playing, it's actually playing an octave lower than where it is in the MIDI, and then I just slowly let the pitch wheel rise up so that the synth is just rising and rising into pitch until it reaches that full next octave. So I layered that sound twice, one in a higher octave and one in a lower octave, and you get this. Next up, I grabbed that same synth bass that we used in the intro, but instead of just playing that, I thought it'd be interesting to show you how you can actually sound design in a VST to make your own Mike Dean style synth bass. And for anyone wondering, the best way to get that Mike Dean synth bass sound is to use a Moog synth. Mike Dean uses synths like the Mini Moog or the Moog 1 all the time for his deep synth basses, and overall Moog just has some of the best bass and lead kind of sounds. And luckily, Arturia has a VST emulation of the Mini Moog called the Mini V, so I'm going to dive into that plugin and show you how you can make your own Mike Dean synth bass from scratch. All right, so I just opened up this Mini V, and the first thing you want to do is go to this top left corner and click New Preset so you have a completely default sound like this. So the first thing we're going to want to do to make it a bass sound is change the octaves that we're playing in, right? So we're going to go to the oscillator frequencies right here, and we're going to turn these all down. And then right now we've only got one oscillator. In a clip that I saw while doing research for this, I saw that Mike Dean uses 2 oscillators to make his bass and lead sounds. So we're going to put in 2. Now, the next thing to do to make it sound more analog and interesting, everything's perfectly in tune right now, right? We're just going to drop this just a little bit so it's a little bit out of key. You hear how it does that? So the next thing that we're going to want to mess with is this drive knob. Just kind of turn that up, make it sound a little bit dirtier. And then the next thing that we definitely want to mess with is this filter right here. So we have the cutoff frequency, which controls how much of the high end can come in. We have this knob, which is the resonance. And And then this contour knob kind of controls how harsh the sound is. You hear how it's got that like harsh attack in the beginning. So I'm gonna turn this up a little bit. Gonna keep this kind of there. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is turn on this glide knob so that we can glide the notes. What we're gonna do next is go into this advanced tab and then go into the effects. And this is where it's really gonna come together and sound a little bit more saucy and not just so plain. So the effects I wanna add are this chorus right here. And that instantly, right? That adds so much like analog kind of feeling. And if you wanna make it really dramatic, you can turn up the depth. You can hear like how out of key that sounds. So I'm just tweaking these knobs. And just like that, you get a pretty good Mike Dean Moog sounding bass. So once I had that bass, I put down that simple bass line, and then I also played a cool little bass riff 1 bar before the switch up comes in to kind of transition and prepare the listener for that switch up. Now that we got that, we need some chords to fill this section out. And for a second, I want to take a break from the super synthy sounds and take some inspiration from a sound combo that Mike Dean calls the trifecta.
Kind of everything I did for a few years was just like called the trifecta.
Essentially, he combines these synth basses and synth chord sounds with a big cinematic choir from his Korg Triton. And in his own words, he's used this on countless Kanye West and Travis Scott songs.
A lot of Kanye stuff, a lot of Travis stuff.
Here's a few examples of that sound that I found.
Pop it right about the blue type shit. Put the double O in.
So I put down some simple dark chords with a choir preset from Omnisphere and got this. And once I had that, I wanted to add in some synth chords to kind of complete this trifecta. So I played those same exact chords on a Prophet 10 one-shot from Melody Mastery and got this. Next up, I wanted to take some inspiration from St. Pablo and the Scots.
Flow.
I love how in both of those songs, the synth lead is super delayed, and this is a core part of Mike Dean's sound. Adding this big analog delay is essential because it kind of gives off this repeating call and response kind of effect to your synth lead, and it kind of fills out the track. If you were to play it with no delay, it just stops immediately, and it doesn't give off that ambient, heavenly kind of Mike Dean vibe. So I loaded up this Barbados lead from Melody Mastery, and then I played it in this lead pattern that has these quick little runs, but then it has long notes right after that kind of leaves space for the delay to carry out and play on top of that, instead of just a bunch of crazy synth runs clashing with delay and sounding messy. Next up, if you listen to Type Shit, you can hear that some of the drums come back in on the second half of that synth bridge. So I brought back in the drums from our main section of the beat and just took out the 808. And then I bounced all those down into one file and then half sped it for a different kind of feeling and bounce. And then I just layered that in with those synths that we just made to finish off this section. And after that, I have it drop back into that main section of the beat. Here's what that transition sounds like. Sounding pretty fire, and normally I would just keep it simple, but for the purpose of making a Mike Dean video, it would be no fun to keep it simple. So after the main beat plays again a few times, I added an insane synth outro where stuff gets even crazier. And to transition into this big synth outro, I wanted to take some inspiration from Sirens off of Utopia. You can hear that there's this super harsh vocal sample that starts playing slow, and then it starts repeating and faster and faster and faster, all the way until it speeds up so fast that it almost sounds like a synth lead sound. And it kind of builds that tension and release that we were talking about. So to do this, I grabbed a simple Vox and drowned it in H delay. But to achieve that rising, speeding up kind of sound, we need to get into some super saucy stuff, delay automation. All right, so as you can hear, we just have a super simple Vox sound. But in order to give it that kind of sirens effect and build a ton of anticipation and tension, I added on H delay, and as you can see right here, I've got a ton going on in all of the different automation channels. So I did this earlier in the intro of our beat, but the first thing that I messed around with was automating the delay seconds. So what this does is it speeds up the delay, and it ends up giving this weird out of key kind of vibe, like speeding up, building up to this drop. So as you can see right here, I start at 416 milliseconds on the delay, go down, and then I go back up to slow the delay down. The bigger the number, the slower the delay time. Then I speed it back up when that synth outro finally comes in. Then after that, I'm also automating the feedback. So I turned it up super loud right here so that it is kind of rising and getting louder. And then once the synth outro comes in, I kind of let it die down a little bit. Also automating the mix so that the delay signal gets louder than the dry signal. And then right here, I'm also automating the filter on the delay. So once the synth outro comes in and I want the other elements to shine instead of this vocal chop, it cuts off the high end so it's not as bright and piercing to your ears. But anyways, now let's listen to what this vocal sounds like with all those automation channels. Once I had that, I added back in that siren gliding synth sound that we made earlier, and I kept the 808 playing. Also, I purposely left a 2-bar space before that synth outro comes in to just continue to build that tension of those sliding out of key synths and the repeating vocal chop to just build the anticipation for the outro. Now that we have the transition done, it's time to get into the actual outro. And just like with all these synth sections, I wanted to start with the synth bass. And so far, we've kind of used some more low-key synth basses, but I really love the unfiltered, bright, and mean synth basses that you can hear on songs like Father Stretch My Hands, Pray for Love, and Beat It.
Bitch, it ain't no Uber service inside the field. Sneaking on a logo.
So I grabbed this bass from the Melody Mastery Bank and put down a super simple bass line. Up until now, once we put down the bass, we normally add chords, but for this section, I want to purposefully not use chords, at least not yet. Chords add a more emotional kind of sound to the melody, but sometimes it sounds nice to just have a synth bass and a lead playing. So I grabbed another synth lead from Analog Lab, and on this section, I wanted the lead to go even crazier than the ones in the previous sections. And I've heard through the grapevine with people who've actually worked on records with Mike Dean that he just improvises all these crazy synth outros and finishes them in like 15-20 minutes because he's just so good at playing the keys and working with the synths that it's just like second nature to him. And you can even hear him talking about that in this clip.
See, everything I do is literally improv, you know what I mean? I don't really think about much at all.
And real quick, just to show how crazy he is on the keys, take a look at this clip of him working on Future and Metro Boomin's Beat It. You could definitely see he knows how to play the keys like crazy, and those kind of melodies are almost impossible to just click in on MIDI. So for this part, I made sure to grab my MIDI keyboard and actually improvise the melody, working with the pitch wheel and the mod wheel, just like Mike Dean does to make the synth sound more interesting. And real quick, before we keep building the synth outro, which gets crazy, I promise, I'm going to show you how you can sound design and make a Mike Dean synth lead like this completely from scratch in a VST. All right, so we're back in the Mini V. So we're going to go in right here, click that new preset again. And this time, we don't want to mess with the range and turn it down to a lower pitch. We're going to add in that second oscillator. It's very similar to making a bass sound. We're going to make sure to turn up that glide knob. Then we're definitely going to want to mess with this filter. And then this contour knob, I want to add like a little bit more of a bite to it. right? And that sounds super good, but it's a very basic synth kind of tone right now. I'm gonna also turn up this vintage knob just to make it sound more analog. Turn up that drive knob that I was talking about with all these plugins to just make it a little bit more saturated and dirty. Then we're gonna go into the advanced tab and put on this delay right here. And that is gonna make the lead sound so much more interesting. And I'm gonna put it to a half bar delay, so it's a pretty long delay, so that when we play these kind of runs, it gives that call and response feeling. And just like that, with moving a few knobs, you can make a super fire Mike Dean kind of lead sound. Next up, I played a second lead improvising as well. For this one, I made sure that it was a more filtered lead that wasn't as bright so that the two leads weren't clashing when they were playing together. Also, just to make sure there was some more separation, I made sure to pan the first lead to the left and the second one to the right. And now that the bass and the lead have their room to shine in the first section of the synth outro, on the second part, I wanted to build it up a little bit more and tie it all together with some chords. And up until now, we've been using some more filtered pads and softer synth kind of sounds, but across a ton of Mike Dean's work, you can hear these super bright, super saw sounding synths, and they sound amazing. So I went back into the Melody Mastery Analog Lab Bank and grabbed this Fiend synth, and I put down this super simple chord progression. And to be real, the chords on these Mike Dean synth outros are really not that interesting or complex. Most of the time, they're there to just kind of fill out the melody and leave room for him to go crazy on the synth bass in those synth leads. One thing that you can do to just spice up the chords a little bit is introducing them a bar early, just like Mike Dean did with this stabby synth pattern on the Scots.
Let's go.
So I added a similar stabby pattern to these chords and got this. If you take a closer look at the MIDI, you can see that I'm actually gliding the chords using my pitch wheel to make the chords feel like they're kind of falling into each other or rising into the next chord, similar to how he does it in this video. Mike Dean uses the pitch wheel and the mod wheel all the time to make his synth sound more interesting and ear-grabbing. And if you do this using your MIDI controller and your VSTs, you can make your VSTs sound a lot more like they were actually played in and not just some clicked in robotic kind of stuff. Anyways, next up, I brought back in that Prophet 10 one-shot from earlier and those gliding siren type of synths, which I've used all over this beat. And I kind of wanted to keep these sounds repeating so it kind of builds a theme or constant sound to make everything feel more cohesive. And then finally, one of my favorite underrated parts of Mike Dean's production are his insane guitars. You can hear crazy guitar solos like his legendary one on Kanye's Devil in a New Dress, but I really also love the subtle gliding guitar accent kind of sound that he used on this song. So before we get into the solo, I wanted to recreate that. So I grabbed my electric guitar and just kind of played notes like this, just sliding my fingers up and down to get that pitch gliding effect. And then I added a ton of guitar amp, H delay kind of plugins to just set that Mike Dean vibe. This sounds fire, but my favorite Mike Dean guitar solos are on his work with Kanye West, like in Devil in a New Dress, Moon, and Hold My Liquor. These guitar solos sound so amazing, and from what I can tell, it's for two main reasons. First being amazing playing on the guitar, you can't fake that. And since I'm not the best on the guitar, I went into my Melody Mastery kit because I've got phrases that I worked on with real session guitarists, and I grabbed this electric guitar solo phrase. And And this sounds great already, but like I said, that's only half of the battle. The second reason why Mike Dean's guitar solos sound so good is the processing. His guitars are super distorted and gritty, and if you listen closely to songs like Moon and Hold My Liquor, you can tell that these guitars sound super thick. And he talks a bit about what effects he uses on his guitars here.
And take me through your chain, like your recording chain, how you record guitars these days.
Just playing through an intelligent harmonizer with auto-tune and guitar rig on it, and H delay.
So essentially, he's using a combination of guitar amps with plugins like Guitar Rig, analog delay with H delay, and some kind of harmony engine to make stuff feel thick. So let me show you how to use those effects to make your guitar sound cooler. All right, so the first thing I did was I added a bunch of guitar amp plugins, and the easiest way for me to do this is I just go into the stock Logic effect library, and they have a bunch of distorted guitar presets. So I just choose this flagellated lead, and with just that effect, you get something like this, which already sounds a lot more like Mike Dean. But the next thing we need to do is harmonize these so they sound more thick. So what I did is I grabbed this pitch shifter plugin and I pitched it down an octave so it sounds like this. But then I turned the mix down so that both the high octave and the low octave are playing together, so it gives it some thickness. Then I just added some EQs to clean everything up. And then right here, I added H delay again. I really want to drill that home that this is an essential plugin to get that Mike Dean kind of sound. And I just added a simple analog delay on this one, but I turned it up pretty high, so it's a pretty noticeable delay. So I wanted to make it sound even bigger, and I pitched that whole guitar phrase up an octave with the exact same effects on it. So all together, we're playing 3 octaves. Here's a quick before and after of those effects, and there's a huge difference in the sound. Once I had that, the beat was 100% done, finally. But before I play this finished beat, I just want to remind you that almost every single sound that you heard in this beat was from Melody Mastery. The guitar phrases, presets, synth one-shots, all of it. So if you want to level up your melodies and get that Mike Dean kind of sound, click the first link in the description down below. And now that I got the shameless plug out of the way, let's listen to the full beat. Back into the beat. And we got the big switch up coming. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two from this one. It was super fun to make. And if you want more videos like this, just comment down below and I'll see you guys in the next one.